Well, welcome again, friends. My name is Wendy Cooler. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a member of Sandy Spring Friends meeting in Baltimore yearly meeting, and I am serving as the convener of this project called the Friends Incubator for Public Ministry. If you are here, you probably have some idea of what we are. We are a project held under the fiscal sponsorship of Sandy Spring Friends Meeting. And our mission is to support meetings and supporting the ministry of all, for real, for real. And that includes the ministry of those called to a more public ministry, a ministry that perhaps takes them outside of their meeting for some part of their lives under a specific concern with the support and accountability that is provided by the meeting community itself. So, to that end, I was saying that Cheryl is here, who is a fellow of ours. We are offering a fellowship to 5 meetings and 5 public ministers this year. We hope to expand the project where we are working this year very specifically on discernment processes inside of the meeting and with ministers and their accompanying elders. And then next year, we will be working on other types of skills with the same cohort of friends. And one of the things that we do at the incubator that doesn't cost enormous amounts of resources like the fellowship does is we offer public events. And it seemed like it would be a very good idea to call upon our friend Marcelle Martin to do some work with us around what discernment is and what it isn't, and what some of the possible technologies of discernment are that are available to us in our meetings. And Marcel came to mind because I've known Marcel since 2018 when we met at a gathering for women and genderqueer friends that were traveling under a specific concern. So, public ministers who were women and genderqueer. And that was part of a project that has been laid down that was led by Viv Hawkins in Philadelphia yearly meeting. We met at a retreat center in New York. We had a wonderful time. I remember Marcel perhaps didn't make me cry, but she facilitated some very healthy crying as I processed, what was hard about public ministry and my call. She's very much an elder in public ministry in Friends communities. As you're probably aware, she's written a couple of books and Pendle Hill pamphlets, and she's been a teacher at Pendle Hill for a long time. Um, and much of her scholarship and her ministry has been around discernment itself. And I know that whenever I see you, Marcel, I know that we're going to find a quiet corner to sit in with each other, and we're just going to hold each other so tenderly. And I just can't imagine anyone better to be doing this public presentation on discernment as far as we can get in 1 hour together, which might be shallow, it might be deep. I hope that friends have a way of continuing to process what we talk about in this space this evening in your home communities and inside yourself and in your other relationships. So, with that, I wanted to open with a question for you, Marcel. Um, and that is, what is discernment?
Mm. Okay, thank you, Wendy. Thank you so much for this invitation, and thank you to everyone who showed up tonight and who cares about discernment and ministry. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad for this opportunity to talk. And what is discernment? I think the word literally means something as simple as sorting or distinguishing one thing from another. So when Quakers talk about discernment, we're distinguishing the leadings and the energy and the movement of the spirit from everything else, no matter how good that other thing might be, including our motivations. We actually have many voices inside of us, the psychology is now talking about many parts inside of us, but many different kinds of motivations. And, I believe that they're all trying to help make things better for us. But not all of them are the leadings of the spirit. And that's what we have to distinguish. But I have found in my life that we're not only distinguishing what is the spirit asking us to do, but how am I getting in the way of doing what the spirit is asking me to do, or how can I respond more fully or faithfully, and also discerning how is spirit asking me to be, not just what is spirit asking me to do. Wendy, how would you define discernment?
Oh, I mean, yes, yes to all that, Marcel. Um, I'm very emotive, as you know, and so I think more than defining discernment, I feel led to talk about how I feel about discernment. Um, and I often feel like when I am, being pulled into, existential questions, spiritual questions of what I am called to do. I just feel like, oh no, not again. No, I think I'm clear. I think I'm clear. I think we're good. I don't think we needed to go through that again. My experience of discernment is that it sometimes feels joyous. It feels ecstatic sometimes. There is a sort of mystical experience I have of discernment, particularly discernment that leads me to love more deeply. But often loving more deeply has really serious, inconvenient consequences. And so the beginning stages of even that which ends in ecstasy feels painful, laborious, and frightening to me.
Hmm.
Does that match your experience of what it feels like?
Definitely the joy, the love, that sometimes ecstasy, the expansion that comes, and the like claiming of parts of ourselves that have been lost, or of reality that have been lost. But it also, the spirit is always stretching us into the places where we're afraid to go, or that are constricted and we don't want to look at. And so, I mean, people sometimes say to me, oh, if, I thought if were dedicated to the spiritual life, fear would be gone forever. And I think some
Hmm.
fears fall away forever, and spirit just keeps us leading us into wherever there still is fear, so that it's a constant growth process. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I wonder sometimes about the role of fear. I want to make a joke about, why is spirit like that? Why do we have to experience this, excruciating anxiety as we engage in discernment? Um, and why is growth necessarily a little painful before the ecstasy? Um, and I think about, how in Quaker theologies, um, God or spirit or the light is not a kind of pure thing that, pure things are nothing. Things that are everything are also sort of nothing, that there's nothing to hang on to. And that I feel some gratitude, I guess, for the sediment in our pipes. There's this old Quaker saying, um, when we want to make fun of someone who is delivering a message that perhaps is from NPR or just sounds an awful lot like the person speaking, we say, the water tastes of the pipes, tastes of the sediment in that person, and everything that makes that person who they are. Um, and I feel like for me, in my concept of the way that spirit is moving through me and through the people that I labor with, um, that sediment I've come to see as nutritive. That I can't see all of spirit all at once. um, but there is a something unique in us, that the something that is unique in me needs to labor with, and that is what is magnificent and life affirming about discernment, even the hard parts. How do you, I don't know, how do you conceive of why it needs to be so hard sometimes?
Um, I guess there are a lot of reasons. I mean, one is that our culture is so shaped by fear and limitation and um, like wrong ideas about society and who we are and what our relationship to God is, and that if the Spirit is trying to expand us to become more and more who we are in God's image, and always going to push up against all these ways in which we are, bound to our social conditioning, um, and the
Mhm.
social conditioning of everyone else that we meet. And we're all struggling with that as we try to become more available to spirit and more free in expression of the light that's in us and in everybody.
Mhm.
And I see Valerie is holding her hand up. Is that a way of saying, please speak louder? I will try. Yeah.
Well, when we were getting ready for this call, we said that friends might want to hear some about what we were calling sort of the technologies of discernment, and all the different ways in which we might labor with ourselves and our various communities, and under what circumstances different technologies might be useful to us. Do you want to talk some about that, Marcel?
Yes, I do, Wendy. Thanks for asking. um, I think there's like the stage of discernment, which is always ongoing, which is the individual discernment, and then the engaging with others, either one other person or a group or a meeting or society. Um, and so in terms of the ongoing discernment that we do inside ourselves all the time, I would say that what I call prayer, or we might call holding in the light, or taking the time to lift something up, and ask Spirit, ask the light, ask Christ for guidance about it. That's fundamental in terms of discernment. But there are practices that are helpful, like experiment with light, the meditation that was created by Rex Ambler, which was based on another practice which I've been studying a lot lately called focusing, which is really paying attention to what Eugene Gendlin, the creator of focusing, calls the felt sense inside the body. Our
Hmm.
body is a real tool that's meant to help us discern, and that it's always speaking truth if we'll listen to it and pay attention. But in our culture, we're actually not taught not to pay attention too well to what our body's saying. I find dreams have always been an important form of guidance, but it requires discernment to understand what dreams are saying and which dreams are conveying messages from the spirit. And I think in terms of technology, that a gathered meeting for worship is one of the best ways that we enter the place where we can do discernment. And I find extended meetings for worship, that is meetings that last longer than an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours or more,
Hmm.
can take you to a really deep place collectively that I find is really helpful with discernment. But then you move into, well, meeting for worship is a collective practice, but in other practices where there's a lot more back and forth and talking, so spiritual friendships are really essential. And then sometimes sort of dedicated times of one-on-one conversation, either spiritual nurture, spiritual direction, speaking with an elder, sort of taking something, something's rising in me, I'm feeling something, what is it? And someone who's has experience and can listen and help you do the discernment, sort out what's happening. Um, I've recently been engaging a lot in a practice for groups, small groups, which I call discernment trios. It's sort of like a quick thing where everyone in the group has an opportunity to do a little discernment, which requires the other members of the group asking questions to help draw out awareness of the spirit, which is often what a spiritual friend will do, or a spiritual director, or an elder. And then there's all the different kinds of small group practices for discernment. So the spiritual formation program that many of you may have participated requires people to participate in a small group that meets to talk about spiritual practices and what happens during your spiritual practice. My husband was in a group that met about once a month for 7 years. He found it so helpful. Of course, clearness committees are, just such a wonderful Quaker practice for helping someone listen to the spirit, pay attention to how the spirit is leading them, and helping them do discernment. A clearness committee, takes a lot of energy. It's focused on one person, and I have found that a practice I call faithfulness groups, which is sort of an ongoing mutual clearness committee for everyone in the group over time. So it's a group of 4 to 6 people usually, and each time they meet, they focus on 2 people for an hour. And but because they journey with each other over time, you don't have to give the background material that's usually an important part of a clearness committee. um, with a clearness committee, you're discerning what am I called to do? What is the thing? Is it marriage or membership? Is it a leading to do something? But with a faithfulness group, you're discerning step by step. Okay, I know what I'm called to do, but how do I do it? What's the first step? What's the next step? This is what's happening. How do I discern what that means in terms of going forward or adjusting something? And then there's anchor committees or oversight groups, and that's when a meeting focuses on a particular individual's ministry, usually a public ministry that takes them outside of the meeting and provides ongoing dedicated support to that person. So these are Quakers have wonderful technologies for helping one another with discernment. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm noticing I didn't know about, is it called focusing?
Yeah. Mhm.
I did not know about that. I'm gonna look that up. But to kind of recap what I heard you say, you mentioned focusing on the body, learning from the body, and that's very much a sort of individual kind of discernment that we can do
Mhm.
by ourselves. You mentioned Rex Ambler's experiment with light,
Mhm.
which I think also fits into that category. That it
Yeah,
was something.
he sort of built experiment with light on top of focusing, with a lot of Quaker additions.
Hmm. And these are things that anyone listening to this could definitely Google if you want to find out more about these things. Um, and then, you kind of moved into things that we do with others
Mhm.
as another kind of technology. There's, of course, gathered worship, which might need some definition, and I might invite you to go back to that in a little bit.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think that, many of us are inside of Quaker communities that think we know what these words mean. But we have been laboring about how to do this discernment work with each other for several generations now.
Mhm.
Um, and you talked about the discernment trio, which is a way of kind of having a smaller group, perhaps. The gathered worship could be any number of people, but might be 20 or 30 people or 100 people if you're in a giant urban meeting. But the discernment trio is a way of maybe having a smaller group, and the spiritual friend, maybe just one other person. Um, and then, there's spiritual formation communities, and the faithfulness groups. Um, and those are about, like anchor committees, kind of focusing on a specific call, oftentimes, and how we are being faithful to that call, and whether or not we continue to be called towards something. Like I have laid a ministry down in the last couple of years. For over a decade I was like the trauma girl of Quakerism, and I no longer feel called to work on conflict and all the things that I really felt strongly called to for a number of years. And it's not because I just gave up. It just became clear to me that I no longer needed to be the one carrying that, that there were other people carrying that, and that it was better for me to step aside and let other people fulfill their call to work on our relationships with each other in that way. And I came to that, with my anchor committee, actually. Um, and you mentioned, and I've put your remarks out of order on purpose, because I want to get back to clearness committees, which is the thing that I think a lot of Quakers are familiar with, or at least we're familiar with the term.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I both love clearness committees when I think that they truly are about helping a focused person come to clarity about something. But I've often seen, particularly for those with a problematic call to ministry, whether it's a public ministry or it's a pattern of vocal ministry in the meeting, um, that clearness committees can sometimes be about the meeting feeling that it's clear that you need to stop doing whatever you're doing. Um, and this is a group of people who have assembled to tell you to stop whatever disruptive thing you've been up to recently. Um, and I know that that is the experience of a lot of public ministers. The first reaction to their call is to say no, and that often happens in the form of a clearness committee that you were told you needed to have. Um, and I wonder if we could just spend a couple of minutes talking about what a clearness committee is really, and what some of the best practices might be, or at least I'm sort of allergic to that phrase. Even as I said it, I went ick, best practices, eh. But I wonder if you have thoughts about how we might think about a clearness committee, particularly when the meeting is agitated with the focus person.
Mm. Well, first, I'd like to say that I have not, in my experience, known of a clearness committee that was called to squelch someone.
Mm.
In fact, I've known the opposite, which is a clearness committee that was called to like sort of rubber stamp something.
Oh, that too. Yes.
Um, so in either case, it's not really helping the person with deep discernment of,
Mhm.
respectful, prayerful discernment of what is your experience of how the Spirit is calling you. And
Mhm.
um, yeah, so I think that although the Clearness Committee is one of the greatest gifts that Quakerism offers, how it's offered really makes a difference. And if whether or not it's doing real discernment and real support for discernment depends upon how it's offered. Um,
Mhm.
I don't know what I don't remember exactly what your question was, Wendy.
Mm. It was I was curious about I wonder if you can sort of describe some sort of nuts and bolts things about clearness committees, and how they might think of themselves, particularly if the members feel like they have the answer, whether it's, they're agitated in some way, or, this is just they're going to rubber stamp something, as you
Right.
were saying. How
Yeah.
do we approach the clearness process as friends?
It's really an opportunity for everyone, not just the focus person, to really pay attention to how the Spirit's at work, to honor that, to honor the subtle ways that the Spirit's at work in us, to ask
Hmm.
what I call evoking questions. That is, the questions um, that we don't have the answer to, but that evoke the person's own deep knowing of how the Spirit is at work in them, evoke their own awareness of what's going on, evoke the truth
Mhm.
that they need to speak, that they may have not have felt free to speak before because they didn't have the right situation in which to do it. Um, in general, we invite people who are going to have a clearness committee to write a little background paper. So they tell, what their experiences has been and what is the call they're feeling led to, so that they don't have to spend a whole lot of time just telling the background. They can just briefly, speak from the heart at the beginning, and then the group can spend more time asking those evoking questions to draw them out more deeply, to help them look at their experiences of the Spirit and discover more fully how the Spirit was at work and what it's doing and what it's calling them to. And
Mhm.
in the ways that I have participated in clearness committees, usually there's a time toward the end when the person has a choice. Do they want more of those questions? Do they want some mirroring coming back? What has the committee seen or felt? Do they need affirmation and support because they're feeling a little shaky? So they, in the last piece, they have an opportunity to ask for what they need
Mhm.
from the committee. Sometimes the committee is for clearness, not only for the individual, but for the meeting as well. And then there's more involved. It's like, so if it's clearness about a ministry, it's like, does this person have a genuine ministry? Are they ready to carry it out in a public way? And is the meeting called to support it?
Mhm.
So those are sort of three different pieces of discernment that are happening.
Yeah, I think of the way I think, and I know we don't necessarily agree about everything. I know places where we kind of disagree with each other. We labor with each other very well, Marcel. Um, but the way that I think of the clearness committee, that first clearness committee, for someone that is feeling a specific call. Um, I think of it as being very much like the clearness committee that might be held for someone seeking membership at the meeting, or a couple who is seeking to be married under the care of meeting. There is clearness that's about an individual, but membership and marriage are both about not just the clearness of the individual, but the clearness of the meeting, that a report is made back to business meeting with a recommendation to either hold this, to either accept the membership request um, or to hold this marriage under the meeting's care. I know that the way we handle membership is often, the rubber stamp that you were talking about. I mean, it's very rare to have your membership not approved by business meeting, though it does definitely happen. Um, and marriages held under the care of meeting. It's very similar. We're very happy when people would like to be married under our care, though it does happen that we do sometimes decide we can't support a marriage. Um, and when we do decide that we're going to hold a marriage under our care, um, I know that this is a concern for people and couples enrichment and that are active in that public ministry. That very often our meetings don't know how to really hold a marriage under our care. We're very good at the wedding. The wedding is beautiful, but we don't really know how to check in with the couple. It feels invasive. There are things in our culture that prevent us from really holding these things under our care. And I feel like perhaps some of those same social dynamics, the way that many of us have been trained to be nice middle class people and not too nosy about each other, are at play when the increasingly less rare um, circumstance of someone having a concern, having going through the clearness process, having business meetings say, yes, we hold this ministry under our care, but the meeting doesn't really know how to follow up on that. Um, I would invite you to have an opinion about, how the meeting might follow up on that. But what you might feel called to say, and I invite you to talk about, is when we become clear about something, whether it's as an individual, like in experiment with light or with the focusing work, um, or whether we become clear about something in our spiritual friendship, or, as a result of a clearness committee, or, we have created an anchor committee for a public ministry. What does it feel like? What are some of the practices we might engage in to make that clarity real? How do we get past some of our training as nice middle class people into a place of action from our clarity?
Yeah, so now all of the practices that I talked about, the individual practices that we have to practice every day on our own and then share with intimate friends. I know my husband listens to me quite a lot. And I have a spiritual nurturer, or you could say spiritual director. I have a faithfulness group and an anchor committee, and many different forms of and corporate discernment help. But we need a lot of help because we really have been conditioned not to pay attention to the spirit and not to carry out the leadings of the spirit, and not to let the spirit sort of take the lead in us and in our lives. And the conditioning is really, really strong. I mean, it's so strong and it's so pervasive that it seems normal to be that way. But in fact, we're all under a burden of oppression of the spirit. And so
Mhm.
we really need to look at that. We need to, and friends from the beginning have said the light not only shows us, God's love and God's everlasting love and presence, but also all those things that prevent us from being, following the light or seeing the light or knowing the light. So it's a constantly being shown how we're resisting, how we're afraid, how we're colluding with society to not be faithful. It's a daily practice of learning to see bit by bit, learning to let go bit by bit, learning to turn more and more often to the light, to spirit, to God for guidance and in trust. And we really need friends to help us do that. Human beings are not made to do all this alone. We can't. And I don't know if there's more you want me to say about that, Wendy. Um, I,
Well,
would- I would say about clearness committees that when I said rubber stamp, I wasn't talking about meetings too frequently admit a person as membership. That may be true, but what I'm thinking about is they don't seriously sit with a person and say, we really want to know about your spiritual journey. We're interested in
mhm.
it. Please tell us. They're just so eager to like just admit a person into membership that they sort of cheat the person out of the deep experience of sharing their experience of how the spirit has been moving in them. That's my experience on a few committees. It's not a. I know some committees really do. Uh, I've experienced that. Go deep and in a very moving way. But I wish more of them did.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Well, do you want to talk about um, some of your personal experiences of discerning call and the work of discernment, the labor of discernment that you have engaged in? I'm willing to talk about the labor that I have
Mhm.
engaged in
Mhm.
around a call to ministry. Um, I don't
Yeah,
know. Do you want to go there? Do you want to talk about what that
I
was
do.
like?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I came to Friends already with a sense that God was calling me. So I was looking for a community that could support a person who had that sense. God is directly, Spirit is directly. I didn't know exactly what the call was when I first came to Friends, but I knew that I was being called in some way. And it's really in the context of Quaker community that I began to sense into my call. And it started with the call to vocal ministry, which was not an easy thing for me or for my meeting, in fact. When I
Mhm.
started speaking about mystical experiences that a few people found made them uncomfortable. But eventually, I got to the point with one meeting where I did feel that I was being called. It was more and more clear that I was being called to certain kinds of spiritual nurture and helping friends with spiritual renewal, and that I needed to ask my meeting for support with this. But I really didn't want to ask my meeting. I was that step was just so hard, and so it was a struggle and a labor even before I asked my meeting. And then once I asked my meeting, it was a small meeting, and there were two people who were new to meeting who didn't really know me very well, who just come and who were like very skeptical that this unknown person in her 30s could actually have a call from God to help nurture religious renewal among friends. That would just seem too grandiose and inappropriate to them. And so they were appointed to the clearness committee along with two people who knew me better and who were more likely to support the call. So it was a real clearness committee, and it was really hard because the two people who had challenges, had serious challenges. One of them said to me, "If you were a professional, I wouldn't hire you." And he said, "I've been in a lot of Buddhist communities, and I know a lot of people who think they're enlightened and they're not, and I know you're not enlightened." And I felt sort of crushed after that first meeting, but the committee agreed to meet again, and I just, I had to wrestle with their real concerns, and I was like, well, to be I'm not asking to be hired for a professional position. I'm not claiming to be enlightened. I'm just sensing that God has been asking me to do this and that I've been doing it already for a while. And eventually, the clearness committee met 3 times before it came to the meeting and asked the meeting for discernment. But it was like, okay, there was like a different sense of what are we actually discerning? We're discerning, does this
Mhm.
person have a call from the Spirit to do this work? And are they ready? And so then my meeting sent people to accompany me to the things I did so that the meeting could discern if I was ready and so forth. So that was the first meeting. And then 10 years later, I moved and I joined another meeting and went through another process. Both of those processes lasted a year and a half. And the worship and ministry committee of the second meeting, since at that point I was also asking for a certain kind of financial support, which simply was that the meeting would accept donations in support of my ministry. The worship and ministry committee said, oh, the meeting's going to have trouble with that. So we'll first start with, do you have a ministry? That took a year and a half. And then the next thing was, can we accept donations for her ministry? And that took another year and a half because the meeting said, well, if we're going to do that from Marcelle, we have to be able to have a process so that we know how to do that with anybody who asks. I mean, they'd already done it with someone else, but once a second person asks, it's like how we do it for anybody instead of one exceptional person. So it
Mhm.
was a long, long process. And in fact, with the second meeting, the only person who'd done this before said, oh, now they're challenging my ministry. So you should quit. You should just give it up.
Mhm.
This is too insulting. And I was like, I'm not doing it just for myself. I'm doing it for ministry among friends. And I have to sit in this very uncomfortable tension and struggle with the meeting and discern with the meeting. And so that was a 3-year process of discernment with the second meeting.
Mhm.
And then 10 years later, when I moved to another meeting, by that time I had published things and written books and been invited to many places. And so it was much easier for them to say, oh yeah, she does have a ministry and we can support it. They don't accept financial donations on my behalf though. So
Mhm.
they do support it with a wonderful, wonderful committee. Mhm.
Mhm.
And a minute of a religious service. Mhm.
Mhm.
So that's my experience. Wendy, what has your experience been?
Well, um, I think there is a real active tension inside of the Religious Society of Friends right now about many things. But one of them is are meetings competent places to hold ministry? Can we trust our meetings to discern with us and support and hold ministry accountable? And I think my experience has led me to the seemingly radical conclusion that we're just going to have to trust our meetings to do this work. Um, and taking this position in a really public way has earned me some criticism that I didn't see coming. Um, and the assumption is that when I've heard the criticism, the assumption is that I am in a privileged position, that my meeting was sort of like Athena, who came out of Zeus's head fully formed, that, my meeting came out of Quakerism fully formed and able to support and hold ministry accountable. They recently, I'm putting this in the chat. They recently added a page to our website about what public ministry is and about the processes that the meeting has recently established for discerning public ministry and supporting public ministry. And in our case, it does include financial support. There is not a Windy Cooler fund at the meeting. There is a public ministry fund that receives generous donations. And in order to access that fund, a ministry needs to be held under the care of meetings. So it's not like a conference fund or something. We have that also, but that's a different sort of pot. And I have a support committee. We call what we have been calling an anchor committee. My meeting calls a support and accountability committee, and we meet once a month and we talk about the ministry in all kinds of ways. We talk about it spiritually. They often get after me about, how I'm, killing myself. So now I go for a walk every day. Um, and and take vacations so I don't burn out. And they also really challenge me when um, I sometimes get bad reviews when I do workshops, and they hurt my feelings, and I go back to my support and accountability committee, and we think about what I can learn from this information, from the feedback that the ministry is receiving. Um, and sometimes, the feedback is projection, both the good and the bad. It doesn't, this is representative of something that the participant needs to process inside of their own community. And sometimes I really do have something to learn beyond having patience with people's projections. And so, the support and the accountability structures at my meeting are invaluable to me today, but they're new.
Mm.
I spent years with my meeting. We spent years with each other, where I don't know if anyone else went home and cried, but I sure did.
Mm.
Years of going home and crying because someone that I deeply love, who I wanted to be proud of me, that I wanted to please them, was very displeased with me. And everything inside of me wanted to conform to please this elder, except God or spirit. And so I think that this was part of the sort of individual discernment for me is, do I have the fortitude to continue laboring with this community? Um, and I feel like that's a really important question because we don't all necessarily have the ability to labor with our communities for 12 years like I did. Um, I honestly don't know how I survived, just materially, during the period of time in which I was laboring with my meeting, or emotionally, but something I was always somehow provided for. But I don't believe that, we are all sort of magically provided for if we have a genuine call. And I don't want anyone to hear that. Some situations are difficult, that they will outlast our ability to meet the challenge. And I think that, being honest with ourselves about, what our resources are, and what the meeting's resources are is an important part of sort of the individual discernment. But I also am so grateful that I didn't just run away screaming. And so I feel like I learned something about the ecstasy of what it means to love a community and to let them love you back through this experience of just intense, painful labor. Um, and I don't want to overpromise anyone that they will find the resources if they are faithful for long enough to get to the place where my meeting has gotten with ministry. And there's still tension, there's still conflict, because of course there is. Um, some people think I'm a self-important jerk. And that's what being a public minister is you're a self-important jerk. And some people are really excited every time I'm on Quaker speak, that they feel that it represents the meeting well. Um, and to go back to like projections, both of those reactions I have discerned are some kind of projection that I am a jerk sometimes. I get tired and I don't take care of myself, and then I'm not in right relationship with the people around me. I'm not always pleasant to talk to, and it's not just because I'm challenging in some divine and holy way. Sometimes I'm just tired and I'm a jerk, and that's true. And um, you know, also, I'm not the worst person ever. And that's not what this is. And there's a lot of self-sacrifice here. And so both of those reactions are just too extreme for them to really be true. But it's important also to just engage with them. And so, in my experience, I'm really resonating with yours. It's just years and years and years of hard, hard work, and finding the resources to stay in the work. And, you know, one of the things that really helped me was finding people like you,
Mm,
that we help each other stay in the work.
mhm,
Um, and I think, one of the things you've always done, and some of my most trusted elders have always done, or often done, I mean, we're all jerks sometimes, is that we encourage each other to keep going back to our home communities, to not leave our home communities when they are challenging to us, even in deeply painful, existentially threatening ways, that we help each other continue to engage in this labor. And so it's like what you were saying at the beginning of this evening. There's all of these levels of discernment and ways of doing discernment. And it's not like we just have to pick one and do it and it's the right way, like advice from Cosmo magazine or something. Like, you
mm,
won't believe number five, this great discernment process we have. Um, but it's sort of like we do them all. We do them all together in one great big soup of discernment that we are committed to.
mm, mhm. Yeah. I, you said so much, Wendy.
Yeah, sorry.
But I'll take up one thing, which is that I do think that at this time, whatever our ministry is, and that we also have the ministry of educating our meetings and wrestling with our meetings, which is ultimately the ministry of helping our meetings to become more and better at what a Quaker meeting can be. And then we do it not just for ourselves and the particular ministries we're called to, but for our meetings. And because what Quakers can offer when we're operating at our best is something the world needs so badly.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're doing it not just for ourselves and not just for our meetings and not just for all of Quakerism, but for the rest of the world. As a Quaker community, as a piece of the faithfulness that God is calling our whole community to. Um, but it's hard, it's painful, it takes us against all kinds of tender and hurting places in ourselves and in the members of our meetings. Many people have come to Quakers because they didn't like the fact that some people were set apart, and they feel like if someone has a ministry recognized, it's the same old hierarchy. And that's why it's important also to insist that everybody is called to the ministry of service, and helping to bring in a better way, God's kingdom, the kingdom of love and truth and justice and mercy and hope. Everybody has a part, and everyone is called to some kind of ministry, and that we can recognize each person. You know, not everyone is called to public ministry involving going off and speaking to other people, um, but we all need to support each other in that call,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not easy.
Yeah. Well, how do you feel, Marcel, about our having a few minutes of worship with each other?
Mhm.
And then I know you wanted to stop the recording and invite friends into breakout groups, that you had a plan for that. Uh,
Mhm.
is that okay?
Yeah, and if I could do a little bit of a guided meditation before the worship, and then we'll go into breakout groups. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, so I find that for me, when I'm discerning about whether I'm called to something, and starting with call to offering a message in vocal ministry and meeting, I have to go through a process, because it usually starts with something in my head that seems brilliant to my head, and I have to wait and see if it's also going to activate in my heart. And that's one of the ways that I discern whether I am called to actually stand up and speak this message that's now in my mind, whether it's a message that the Spirit is asking me to share with the meeting. So I find that practices of just helping me pay attention to the heart and get grounded in my body are helpful. And so I just invite you, I'll just give some suggestions. And of course, you're free to follow them or not, at whatever feels right to you. You might lower your eyes or close your eyes and take a few slow, deep breaths, and just pay attention to your breath and your body as you're breathing. Notice your feet on the floor and your seat on your chair, and feel that connection with the floor, the chair, the sofa, and underneath that with the earth, which is holding you up. See if you can just rest into the support of the earth. And I invite you to turn your attention to the center of your chest, to your heart area, and to put your hand on your heart if that feels comfortable to you. Maybe take the other hand and put it on your cheek or on your belly or on your thigh or wherever your other hand seems to want to go. Just feel your body and feel your heart area. You might even imagine as you breathe in deeply and slowly that you're breathing into your heart, and then you're exhaling slowly from your heart. This is a way to keep attention on your heart and on your breathing at the same time. And we'll take a few minutes of silence with the question, what are the things you look for as signs of the movement of the Spirit, either to offer vocal ministry in your meeting or to anything else you might be led to do? What are the signs of the movement of the Spirit in you, in your body, in your mind, in your heart? So we're going to have an opportunity in breakout groups of probably 3, just about 4 minutes each person, to share just what are the signs that you look for about discernment when you're discerning about something, how the Spirit is moving in you. So Wendy's going to make the breakout groups of 4. I invite you just to listen to each person for 4 minutes without comments or questions. Just give an opportunity to hear what each person chooses to share. And then we'll come back and have a discussion in the whole group. Does anyone have a question before Wendy puts you in a small group?